When it comes to the fight against insurance companies, large corporations, and the healthcare industry, injured victims are always the underdog. But that doesn't worry us. At Mess & Associates, we're an injury law firm from Philadelphia, and we come to fight. Our clients know that they've got representation with a chip on its shoulder, and it's the same chip that makes Philly the toughest city in the country. Call 215-568-3500 or visit us online at messalaw.com. Mess & Associates, the toughest injury firm in Philadelphia.
EAGLES, Eagles.
Eagles fans, welcome to another edition of Football 24/7. I'm your guy, Tone DeShields II. I'm joined by none other than our Philadelphia Eagles insider, John McMullen, who gives you guys the best Eagles insight in the market. You can check him out on SI.com, also known as Sports Illustrated, but SI.com. Make sure you guys check him out there, Fan Nation. And also make sure you guys check him out on JAKIBSports.com and on JAKIB Sports' original show, Birds 365, with his partner in crime, Jody McDonald. Again, smash that like button, as I always say, and make sure you guys are subscribed to the JAKIB Sports YouTube channel. Now, it's the off season. These shows aren't going to be that long, you guys. We're going to try to keep you here for about maybe 30, 35 minutes. If that, we're going to try to hit you guys with the insight, straight no chaser, and get right to the content. So, John, first and foremost, how you feeling? Second most, man, what's going on with these Eagles, man? What's all this talk about Cliff Kingsbury?
Cliff Kingsbury, where's that? Well, there's some people who believe that the Eagles kind of identified Cliff first, and that would have been their preference for to be the offensive coordinator. I don't know if that's the case. What happened was, I think he was the leader in the clubhouse after the first interviews, and then in the second interviews, he kind of pushed a little bit too much when it came to control. And you have this, you're trying to thread this needle with Nick Sirianni as obviously as an offensive head coach. They're trying to take a lot of power, let's be honest, a lot of power away from Nick Sirianni, but they don't want to take everything away from Nick Sirianni and say, hey, essentially set up a system where the offensive coordinator doesn't have to listen to the head coach at certain times. That's not going to work. So I think they kind of begged off when he pushed for a little bit too much autonomy, and then they went in the direction of Kellen Moore. It was probably 1 and 1A. They were probably battling back and forth, but I think it's fair to say I talked to two people around the Eagles who thought Cliff was sort of the leader in the clubhouse, and then all of a sudden something changed. So that part of it's true. I don't know if you're hearing they wanted Cliff Kingsbury. I wouldn't go that far. I think they were interested in him and things didn't work out. If you think about Cliff in general, he actually agreed to terms with the Raiders, but then he pushed for another year. So maybe he's kind of a headstrong guy. He ended up in Washington, which is going to be interesting because not only does Washington have Cliff Kingsbury, but they also have Brian Johnson now. They hired Brian Johnson to be their passing game coordinator. So, a lot of incestuous moves in the NFC East. If you think about, they hired Dan Quinn away from the Cowboys and Joe Witt as well. So they got Eagles Eagles, the people maybe the Eagles wanted. They have Cowboys people. It's going to be interesting what Josh Harris is doing in Washington.
Yeah, you said a lot there, and there's so much to unpack. Let's just start with the whole Nick Sirianni part of things, right? Cliff coming into those meetings, the second meeting probably pushed a little too hard for control, which probably could start to tread over into Nick Sirianni's wheelhouse. That begs the question, how much does this new dynamic between Nick Sirianni and the front office and just his overall role in general, how much does this change complicate the way they've done their hires thus far? Again, Cliff, he pushed a little bit, he could push a little bit too far. Kellen Moore evidently knew his place in that regard. How much does Nick Sirianni's current position with the Eagles complicate things in their hiring processes?
Well, I think it complicates things in general. That's why I didn't agree with what they did, because you're trying to thread, not only you're trying to thread a needle, you got a really small eye. It's a really small needle. So you're trying to create this setup. And I can't even tell you what exactly the setup is going to be, because in theory, they wanted Nick Sirianni. He he admitted he had to go outside his family of coaches. So that, describes everybody essentially they interviewed. So they wanted to get away from his family of coaches. But on the other hand, somebody like Cliff Kingsbury, maybe the personality's too strong. A lot of things can go wrong in these situations, but basically the description I was given is that he's a better fit for Jalen Hurts. And that was why he probably led the pack at the beginning, because he's got a lot of experience taking advantage of quarterbacks who run a lot of RPOs and stuff like that. So that's probably where he had the advantage to begin. But, then you go through the interview process and certain red flags pop up. Maybe somebody else impresses more than you think. But, I wouldn't say it was, oh, the Eagles wanted Cliff Kingsbury. I don't think that's the case. So I don't know if anybody's saying that, but I don't know if anybody's going that far. They were interested, and once they got through the interview process, they turned it in a different direction, which happens all the time.
If hearing you say that Cliff Kingsbury potentially may have been a more hand in glove fit for Jalen Hurts and his skill set, it makes you think about Kellen Moore and what he brings to the table and how this dynamic is going to exist between him and Jalen Hurts' skill set, right?
Well, I mean, you can look at it a lot of ways. I think I said it back last week. I said, well, maybe what Jalen Hurts is now today on February 8th, whatever it is, Cliff might be a better fit for what he does well today. But I think the goal is ultimately to keep evolving, and perhaps Kellen Moore becomes a better fit because he can coach the more traditional aspects of the game and marry it to the RPO game, and maybe it ends up being better. So, we talked about motion. Kellen Moore uses more motion. The Eagles want to get more motion into the offense. They want the quarterback under center a little bit more, not a ton, but a little bit more. Basically, right now, it's just tush pushes. They want to be able to throw from under center. He's got more experience doing that. So, and he's been very good with blitz and teaching quarterbacks how to handle the blitz. So he's at one point had Dak Prescott was number one in the NFL a couple years ago against the blitz. So he's got a lot of positives in his camp as well. But if you're just talking about maybe the Nick Sirianni offense and how you want to rewind back to 2022 and what Jalen did well when he was runner-up to the MVP, probably Cliff's a better fit for that. So, but I think evolution is a good thing. And I think that's part of the problem. I don't think he evolved enough as teams adjusted and took away some of the things he did well previously. And that's what defensive coordinators in this league do. They try to take away what you are comfortable doing and make you left-handed, so to speak. They're just trying to make you uncomfortable and trying to make you do things that you're not as comfortable with. And that's sort of, I think, what happened with Jalen Hurts this season.
So, what do you say to those who say, well, the Eagles should bring somebody in who can do a better job at maximizing what he does well and kind of reinventing and, taking what he does well to the next level. If there's a next level that even exists, when it comes to what he does, what do you say to those people who say, Kellen Moore, it could be a square peg round hole thing with Jalen Hurts? What do you say to that?
I wouldn't go that far, but I think there is something. That's what Nick Sirianni said before the season. Basically, it's not necessarily. He did an interview with Jeff McClain when Jeff was on with us at Birds 365. He did an interview with Jeff before the season, and that's basically what he said. It's not necessarily adding things; it's just perfecting what you do. And unfortunately, the way of the NFL, that didn't work, and you regressed. So now the problem is, and this is, coaching staffs around the league, it's not just Philadelphia. The problem is the industry is so public facing. Fans get upset when you don't reach expectations. It's very hard to be disciplined and not react to that. And Jeffrey Lurie has proven that he's not going to be the most disciplined, the most patient person. So you assign blame. And the blame assigned was, Brian Johnson, Alex Tanney to a certain degree. Most of the coaching staff is getting blown out, with the exception of Jeff Stoutland. We'll see if anybody else, I think Kevin Patullo as well. We'll see if anybody else sticks around. But, even Jeff Stoutland's assistant, Roy Ispan, that surprised me, is leaving for Cleveland in a lateral move. So that means the Eagles essentially let him go. And as I said, Brian got a job. Alex Tanney is now a passing game. So Alex got a promotion. So other people around the NFL don't think these are bad coaches, but it's the way of the NFL. You have to assign blame. People don't want to blame the players, and understandably so. I get it from a fan perspective. Believe me, I get it. You don't want to blame the players.
So this isn't just the Eagles issue. This is a league-wide issue.
Oh, yeah. This is a league-wide issue. Look at what's going on in the NFC East. I wrote about this. Look at what's going on. Dan Quinn is the head coach of the Washington Commanders. Now, he didn't get fired in Dallas, but he was coming off the worst game of the year when they got blown out in the playoffs by the Green Bay Packers. They hired the Cowboys secondary coach to be the defensive coordinator. They just hired Brian Johnson to be the passing game coordinator underneath Cliff Kingsbury, who we were just talking about, to be the offensive coordinator. You look at the Eagles and what they've done. Kellen Moore, former Cowboys offensive coordinator a couple of years ago. Doug Nussmeier, former Cowboys quarterback coach. They were blamed in Dallas a couple of years ago, scapegoated in Dallas. Now they're in Philadelphia. It's amazing. And Dallas is now, they need a defensive coordinator. And two of the people they interviewed are Ron Rivera and Wink Martindale.
This is a mess, John. This is a mess when you put the way you framing it right now. It makes me think like, man, this is nasty work. This is like high school. Everyone's dating each other's exes.
Yeah, it's just you're shoveling. You got the deck chairs and you're just shuffling them around. I mean, they're not bad coaches.
Right.
Listen, I say it all. Andy Reid's going for his third Super Bowl title. People don't talk like us talking about other teams, but with Kansas City, Andy won 4 games his last year in Philadelphia. Doug Peterson won a Super Bowl He ran 4 games. This is the common sense aspect of this I don't get. Did they all of a sudden become bad coaches when they have bad seasons?
Right.
Coaches are not miracle workers. You know, when you're succeeding, I tell you all the time, it's players, players, players first. When you're succeeding, when you're not succeeding, when you're mediocre, it's players first. Coaches, really, really good coaches, are just making you a little bit better than you could be on your own. And that's always a sliding scale. AJ Brown obviously has a bigger ceiling than Quez Watkins. So you can't expect Aaron Moorhead to turn Quez Watkins into AJ Brown, to say the least. When you look at blaming Brian Johnson, just understand, when in 2022, when Jalen Hurts was, again, the runner-up for the MVP, Brian Johnson was the guy working with him most closely on a daily basis as he turned into this superstar. And now he's a bad coach? No, you're just assigning blame. Then, the Eagles offense, I get it on Twitter today. I got the Eagles offense is terrible, this, that. They were embarrassing. They were the number 8 offense in the NFL. They were the number 7 offense in points per game. They were the number 3 offense on third downs. They were the number 1 offense on fourth downs. Number 1. They were number 9 in red zone. There is no perspective in this city. None.
So how does a 1-7 record happen? Is it strictly just defense?
Well, yeah, the defense was bad. The defense, and we can go back to Jonathan Gannon. How many times did we discuss, the number 2 defense in the NFL? Not a big deal. No hiccups. Don't worry about it. The next guy's got to be better than Jonathan Gannon. How many times you hear that? I know how many times I heard it. He's got to be better.
Yeah, we did.
Got to be better. There's no perspective. And this morning on Birds 365, Jody and I got yelled at for talking about the Super Bowl. This is part of the problem. If you don't want to pay attention to the rest of the league, you're in your little Eagles bubble, and you have no context to compare the team against everybody else. That's when you say, how does Brian Johnson get a job? 4 teams interviewed him.
Mm-hmm.
He's well regarded around the league. The moment Alex Tanney was scapegoated, I was told, well, he's going to end up in Indy. And that's because not only does Shane Steichen like him, Nick Sirianni likes him. Nick and Shane are thick as thieves. Nick didn't want to fire him. He had to fire him because he was ordered to fire him. Thinks he's a good young coach. And he will continue in an upward trajectory in Indianapolis as he gets a promotion. But when you're top 10 in so many meaningful categories, and you think you have a bad offense, that's because you're not paying attention to the rest of the league. And then you're saying, well, Kellen Moore's going to be an upgrade. Well, guess what? Kellen Moore was in the league last year with one of the best quarterbacks, certainly the most talented quarterbacks in football, and some pretty good skill position as well when you talk about Keenan Allen. Now, they had some injuries.
Right.
They weren't top 10 like the Eagles.
It's a good point.
It's just the context is it doesn't exist, and it's strange to me. But my larger point is coaches aren't saving you. Personnel is saving you. Personnel. And Nick Sirianni said it when in the good times. Show me a good coach, and I'll show you a whole bunch of good players.
That's a good point. I mean, it makes you think, when it comes to these organizations, right? It's easy to fire coaches. You can't really fire players. There's so much money invested in these players. and it kind of forces the hand of these. It kind of forces the hand of these organizations to kind of make knee-jerk reactions. When you think about it from the Eagles' perspective, right? Jalen Hurts, he's a big-time quarterback now, big money quarterback. You can make an argument. I believe the length of the contract goes until about, what is that, 2027 or 8, if I'm not mistaken. But arguably, they have about a 4-year window with this Jalen Hurts contract, especially with the cap hits being as low as they currently are. When you think about it from that perspective, when you think about it from the money perspective, investing in the quarterback, could that speak more to the hastiness that the Philadelphia Eagles have been moving with over the past few weeks, especially with their coaching hires and fires?
Yeah, I mean, Jeffrey's shown a propensity of this in the past, so I mean, it's typical. That my biggest problem, people talk about, the stretch, which at the end of the season was terrible. Don't get me wrong. Everybody knows it was terrible.
Yeah, they shocked you a couple times. Every time you thought they would win, they lose.
Yeah.
They shocked all of us.
Yeah, they certainly shocked me in Tampa, but it's not necessarily my problem with Jeffrey is in other cities, not every city. There are some, Pittsburgh, Green Bay, Dallas, Philadelphia. Fans aren't going away. They can say what they want. They can say, if so and so isn't fired, I'm not coming to a game.
Yeah, okay.
and one out of 20,000 might follow up on that, but it's not meaningful. And my point with that is they have the luxury of being patient, but they don't utilize it. They don't
expand on that a little bit more. They have the luxury of being patient, but they don't utilize it. What does that mean exactly?
In other words, they don't have to. There's certain places where you have to fire people because you have to sell your plan to the fan base, or you're not going to sell tickets and you're not going to sell jerseys and you're going to have difficulty filling stadiums and maybe they're not going to watch you on Sunday. There are certain cities where, things aren't as football passionate. Look at everywhere down south, by the way. Look at Los Angeles, where you're a half hour away from the beach and there's other stuff to do and maybe better stuff.
That's a good point. That speaks to why the Rams really went all in the way they did. That's a good point.
Yeah, and the Eagles, and there's certain other teams that have the luxury of being patient if they choose to be patient. They choose not to be patient. And, the assumption that I heard somebody today, I don't want to pick on him, but somebody today said, well, they made a mistake because they hired a rookie offensive coordinator and a defensive coordinator with 1 year experience, and they're a contender. And you can't do that if you're a contender. And I maintain, go back to 2021, what they had a rookie head coach. They had a rookie defensive coordinator, and they had an offensive coordinator with 1 year experience. That's it. And they were in the Super Bowl in year 2. They had some growing pains in year 1.
Right.
So the assumption that you're not the growing pains aren't about the lack of experience. The growing pains are about the transition. So you're making this transition and trying to thread the needle, which makes it even worse with Nick Sirianni. So you got the same head coach, you got a virtually brand new coaching staff, brand new coordinators, and people think, oh, they're going to hit the ground running because they have experience. No, people have to learn how to work under Vic Fangio. People have to learn how to work under Kellen Moore. You're going to have growing pains.
Well, here's the thing: the money changes everything. It's it's interesting. You do make a good comparison between 2021 and 2023. They're pretty much mirror seasons in terms of the staff, the coordinators to be specific, and their experience. I think the key difference in all of that is the fact that now they're paying Jalen Hurts north of $50 million.
Well, yeah, but the Jalen Hurts cap hit was very minimal this year.
Agreed.
how we set
Agreed.
up the contract. It was $6 million and something, somewhere in that range.
Yeah. I think it's
Um,
for the 2024 season, the cap hit is 13 million.
Yeah, 13, 14, I think somewhere 13 and a half.
Right.
And then it kicks up to like 22 or something. And then it
Still
really
manageable.
spikes. Then it really spikes to 32. But by 2026, even if you want to continue on with the Jalen Hurts era, by then his contract will be very cost effective, because as you see more quarterbacks sign, you just get more and more money.
Mm-hmm.
So that shouldn't be that much of an issue. Yeah, it's easier. And you see it again, most Super Bowls, most recent Super Bowls, and you'll see it with Brock Purdy on Sunday, quarterback on a rookie deal. So it makes it easier to build a roster, no doubt about it. But, Patrick Mahomes gets paid, and the Chiefs are doing just fine as well. So
Right.
you have to do it a little bit differently. The Eagles got to do a better job hitting on some draft picks early that can get them on the field. And maybe that has to do with, they're a very veteran laden team. The Chiefs are interesting to me because if you looked at the Chiefs, say week 8 in 2022, they didn't look like a Super Bowl team.
Right.
But they were playing very young players, particularly in the secondary. And they had the patience to grow with those players. And by the time they got to the Super Bowl, those guys were making plays and were being effective. Certainly as rookies, they made mistakes. The Eagles haven't been able to do that this year. If you go back in fact, I saw a bunch of guys who were out there in Las Vegas writing about it, because the Chiefs have kind of talked about it. Their demarcation line was kind of the loss to the Eagles. That was an ugly loss for them. Travis Kelce dropping the ball, Valdez Scantling dropping the ball, just really poor, just a really poor performance, beating themselves and things like that. And they keep getting incrementally better. They had no weapons, and all of a sudden they let Rashee Rice grow, and he's been a dominant player in the playoffs. I don't see that growth in season from the Eagles, partially because they don't seem willing to play young players. Last year they played Jalen Carter because he was so effective early. Didn't play Nolan Smith, didn't play Sidney Brown till they were forced to play Sidney Brown. Then he was out of position. They never put him back at safety till it was too late.
Right.
Then he tears his ACL. They don't play Nolan Smith. When they do play Nolan Smith, it's an off-ball linebacker, primarily because, of injuries, no doubt, but still, he's not going to be effective at off-ball linebacker. Why are you doing that? So, there's where you can criticize the coaching staff a little bit, and you can also criticize Howie Roseman, and maybe they got to get on the same page and say, you know what? If you're playing young players early in the season, they're going to make some mistakes, and you got to live through it. And you got to play through it. As Jim Schwartz used to say, startup costs, get them over with. Get them over with. And it's going to be hard in the moment because, again, you're talking about a football passionate city, and they're going to say, so-and-so stinks. But guess what? They're not going away. So you have the luxury of patience, which is what I brought up. They can say whatever they want. You have the luxury of patience.
It's interesting. We're going to begin to close the show pretty soon. It's interesting. It's like the Eagles pretend as if they're so beholden to their stakeholders. If they were like a Forbes company, they act like, they have so many investors to answer to. In reality, if we're putting it in perspective, speaking for myself, as much as this team bothers me at times, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going anywhere.
Nobody's going anywhere. I know that, and they know that, but they don't. And again, it's one guy. It's not like I can tell you that if it were up to Nick Sirianni, He might have made certain decisions on certain guys. And he might have thought, and he's the expert, he might have thought that certain assistant coaches didn't live up to what he was hoping for. They had to hire some guys late because they went to the Super Bowl, and maybe with more options, he could have tweaked some things. But obviously, guys like Patullo and Jamal Singleton and Brian Johnson and Alex Tanney and Aaron Moorhead and Jason Michael, they would have been back. Jeff Stoutland, they would have been back. Defensively, he probably would have made a lot of changes. But instead, you have a gutted coaching staff. And, some of them have had success, the new hires that we do know. But the assumption that you're not going to have any growing pains because Kellen Moore has been a play caller in Dallas or with the Chargers, he's still got to learn this offense. He's still got to learn his players. And the only thing that helps with is time and patience. Same thing. And maybe by year 2, you start clicking. But I think the assumption that you just change coaches and everything's going to be fine. No. I mean, the Eagles just hired a linebackers coach, Bobby King.
Yes, great segue. I'm glad you brought that up. I wanted to talk to you about that, about what he brings to the table and his resume as well.
He's probably their 4th choice. I mean,
John, I love you, man.
They were trying to get Joe Barry, and they were trying to get Mike Caldwell, and they were trying to get the guy in Miami, I forget his name, who was with Vic last year, and they all took other jobs. Now, we were talking with Martin Frank this morning, why would they take other jobs? Because Vic's got this great reputation. Why? Because they don't have any linebackers. So as a coach, you're not going to look good if you don't have any linebackers. So,
that's true. And that's even more to your point, that it's about the players, not the coaching.
Exactly. That's exactly my point. It's about the players. And that's the reason guys who have options, like Joe did, Mike did, and Andrew signed with Green Bay. They all have better linebackers. So, in other spots, Kellen Moore, probably had other options. Not probably, definitely had other options. Now he's going to come to Philadelphia because they have a ton of talent on offense. Yeah, he'll try that. So, obviously in each individual spot, but as far as, and I'm not picking on Bobby King, it's just, and people say, no matter, whenever I tweet out Eagles hired somebody, they say, is he any good? I mean, that's why I said this morning, there's no PFF grades for assistant coaches. I mean, I'll ask Nick if he's good, and Nick will say he's great, blah, blah, blah. There's never been a bad coach hiring. It's like a successful surgery because everybody gets the guy they want, everybody. But he's got some experience, and I'm sure he's a good positional coach, but they probably would have wanted somebody else, and they didn't get somebody else because the personnel is not there right now.
Right. This will be my final point before we get out of here, John. I'll pick your brain about this. Everything you say about the Eagles is so fascinating, especially when it comes to how they handle these coaches and their impatience with the Brian Johnson Sean Desai combo. And also their willingness to just strip Nick Sirianni so quickly of his control of his team. It really speaks to their lack of trust. In my opinion, it speaks to their lack of trust in not just their coaches, but Nick Sirianni, to be specific. And they trust themselves more than they trust their coaches. They believe they're the reason, the front office, I mean, and the higher ups, they believe they're the reason why their teams are successful. And if a coach can't execute what they want to do, they're just going to off them, without any sort of remorse.
It certainly seems that way. I mean, we went through.
You fired a Super Bowl winning head coach.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't get no more arrogant than that.
Yeah, it certainly seems that way. That's the way of the industry. They're not the only team. Most teams do it this way. There's tremendous turnover with the coaching staff. I just talked about the whole NFC East. I mean, it's just a big incestuous madhouse. Even if the Giants, who stayed away, the Giants interviewed Denard Wilson. He was almost their defensive coordinator. They ultimately hired Shane Bowen, who was the Titans defensive coordinator, but he lost his job because the Titans hired a new head coach, and the Titans hired Denard Wilson. So the Titans got the Giants got the Titans defensive coordinator. The Titans got one of the guys the Giants were interviewing. It's just, the assumption that there's these huge, vast differences between, and then you got guys like Shane Bowen going from, all right, you're out in Tennessee, you're into New York.
Bobby Keene goes from Tennessee to Philadelphia. It's everybody's dating everybody, right, John?
Exactly. It's it's a big family affair, and again, it's going to be fun because you're going to have Cliff Kingsbury and Brian Johnson going against the Eagles, and you're going to have Doug Nussmeier and Kellen Moore going against the Cowboys. You're going to have Dan Quinn going against the Cowboys from Washington, and Joe Witt from Washington's perspective. Who knows if they hire Wink Martindale, you'll have him going against the Giants, and on and on and on and on. And it's funny because if you go to these other cities in Washington, they think they got a great coach in Dan Quinn. People in Dallas are kicking him out the door because he lost in the playoffs. The Eagles think they got a great offensive. Eagles fans think they got a great offensive coordinator who got scapegoated in Dallas 2 years ago. He was the He was Brian Johnson. He was the scapegoat. He was the one assigned blame for failing to reach expectations. And very few people seem to realize this. So it's like you put a new coat of paint on the same thing.
Oh man, that's a hell of a way to put it. We'll close with this, John. As incestuous as the NFC East, as the NFL has become, one thing I've always learned in life: never date your best friend's ex. It can never end well. And
they're doing that. They're doing that.
It can never end well, you guys. And we'll leave it at that.
John, here's my dream: is the Eagles have a great season, and Kellen Moore is the Cowboys head coach next year. How about that?
Ooh, this can get tricky, man. On that note, you guys, we appreciate you so much for locking in on the content, as you guys always do. Make sure you guys smash that like button. Make sure you guys are subscribed to the JAKIB Sports YouTube channel. This is the JAKIB Sports YouTube Network. Also, make sure you guys check out John on SI.com. Does an amazing job covering your Philadelphia Eagles, providing you with the great insight that he provided us with today. It's always tremendous. Make sure you guys also check him out on JAKIBsports.com. And also, you guys, make sure you check him out on Burge 365, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Eastern time, Monday through Friday, with his partner in crime, the infamous Jody McDonald. I pray for Jody sometimes because he's a Jets fan, and it's never easy. But overall, man, I'm just glad that he's on our side covering the Philadelphia Eagles, and I appreciate you, John, as always, man. Again, smash that like button and make sure you guys are subscribed to the YouTube channel, you guys. This has been Football 24/7 with John McMullen, and I'm your guy, Tony DeShields II, and we'll see you next time. Sorry, Jody.
When it comes to the fight against insurance companies, large corporations, and the healthcare industry, injured victims are always the underdog. But that doesn't worry us. At Messon Associates, we're an injury law firm from Philadelphia, and we come to fight. Our clients know that they've got representation with a chip on its shoulder, and it's the same chip that makes Philly the toughest city in the country. Call 215-568-3500 or visit us online at